welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at Fujifilm's 16 to 80 millimeters f4 lens. Is this a good investment? Who is it for? Stick around to find out, but first... The Fujinon XF 16 to 80 millimeters f4 R OIS WR, which is its official name, and that's a long-ass name, pretty much like any other lens really, is one of Fujifilm's latest additions to their X-mount lineup. This perfectly bridges the gap between their 16 to 55 and their 18 to 55 lenses. The first one is a red badge lens, which kinda like Canon's L series means top of the line, no compromises with their optics, but precisely because of that, there are some disadvantages as well. The first one is pretty predictable. It's the price. It comes at $1,200, which is not particularly cheap. The second ones are the weight and size. It weighs 655 grams, which arguably for a mirrorless is a bit much. But like I said, if you want the best optics and the best sharpness possible, this is what you go for. The second lens could be seen like a regular kit lens in a way, although it is better than what most manufacturers include in a kit usually. This one comes at $700, but almost no one pays that full price, because if you buy it in a kit, as I said, you get a pretty serious discount of almost half, I believe. So yeah, that's a pretty good deal. Also, this weighs only 310 grams. And why I say the 16 to 80 millimeters come right in the middle of them, it's not only because the optical performance is between them, although it kinda is, but also it inherits features from both of them. For example, the weather sealing, which the 18 to 55 doesn't have, and the OIS, which the 16 to 55 doesn't have. And the OIS is really good on this lens. It's rated for 6 stops, Fuji says, but we'll get back to this a bit later. Physically speaking, you've guessed it, this comes right between those other two lenses yet again. It comes at 440 grams, and this is a really good weight, especially if you consider that this offers more reach than the other two do. This is a very compact and light lens, and it offers, in a full frame equivalent, a focal range of 24 to 120 millimeters. The build quality is really good. It's mostly metal, which is always a reassuring feeling in hand, but the barrel inside is plastic, which is fine, and it will make it lighter after all. All you'll find on the lens body are 3 rings. There are no buttons on this. You get a focus ring, which is focused by wire, but it feels really nice and extremely smooth. The zoom ring is solid, and it's a bit on the tighter side even, which on one hand is good because there's no chance of zoom creeping, but also it might make your work a bit harder if you want smooth zoom-ins in video, you know. And the third one is a clicky aperture ring, which is where the R in the lens name comes from. this is very satisfying to move and much tighter than even the zoom one, which means there is no way you'll change your aperture by accident. The lens is weather resistant, which is where the WR initials come from, and Fujifilm tells us that it sailed in 10 places. The filter thread size is 72mm, which is a pretty good standard size, and you might have laying around older filters of this size or a close one, and you can use step up or step down rings to adapt them. The third initial is OIS, and yes, this lens has amazing image stabilizing, which can work with the in-body one too, if you're using it on an X-T4 or XH1 for example. And one small other thing to mention is that this lens comes with a pretty nice lens hood. Okay, so that takes physical aspects out of the way, so let's put it to some real life tests. Alright, I'm in front of a beautiful fully bloomed magnolia tree, and what we want to do here today is find out if this lens, the 16-80, is it possible to, let me show you the magnolia more than me, if it's possible to use this lens as a portrait lens, and for that we're gonna need the help of a model, that would be Kata. I will link her Instagram below or put it on the screen somewhere around there. But the idea is to see if this lens can double up as a portrait lens, or even if you can use it as a main lens for portraits. To be noted, I am not a portrait photographer, so yeah, we'll see how that goes. But if they're not great, it's my fault. I know this might not be the top of the list for someone really invested in portrait photography. However, I think it's interesting to see just how much of a jack of all trades this lens is, and if you could pull it off. And you can definitely use it to get some nice portrait shots. However, if you want nice, creamy background blur, it will be a bit hard to achieve it on this lens. And the only way in which you can do that really is if you're zoomed in at 50 to 80mm and step back a bit. So either that, or try to use it to your advantage and have almost everything in focus, capture more of the background, trees, flowers. Small side note, this magnolia tree is incredibly popular, so it was full of people. The hardest part about editing these photos was actually photoshopping people out of them. But if you're just an occasional portrait photographer like myself, you might be even more interested in the following aspects. This lens also has a constant aperture of f4, which is cool because it remains consistent from 16mm all the way to 80mm, unlike other lenses like the Canon 24-105, which I've covered in the past. And if you want to know why that is a disadvantage to not have a constant aperture, I'll put a link to that video below so you can check it out. However, is the f4 aperture wide enough, or how you'll hear photographers say, is this lens fast enough, referring to the lens aperture? At f4, as I said, it may not sound that impressive, especially on a crop sensor. But combined with that brilliantly implemented OIS, you are able to take some much longer exposure times than otherwise you'd be comfortable with. And also from 50 to 80mm you can achieve subject separation with a beautiful background blur as well. Surprising or not, this lens is capable of some bokeh. However, in my testing I did see some onion rings in the bokeh though. And having a minimum focus distance of only 35 centimeters and a zoom capability of 120mm in full frame equivalent, this means you can even dip your toes in the macro photography world as well. The autofocus on this is snappy, probably one of Fujifilm's best yet. I mean, it works great with face detect, eye detect, tracking for photos. I don't know why for videos. It's quiet for videos as well, which you will want. And it may not be at Canon's or Sony's level quite yet, but the gap is getting smaller and smaller. One weird anomaly that I found though is while zooming in or out, the focus goes back and forth a bit, it pulsates, even if you have it locked on manual focus, so that's weird. But maybe Fujifilm will have it fixed with a firmware update, which by the way, I'd encourage you to update your firmware both for your camera and lens when you get it. On the other hand, the lens breathing on this is minimal, and that's impressive, and if you want to do some manual focusing, I'd recommend setting the focusing from the camera menu to linear for a smoother experience. And also to turn on your focus peaking, which highlights which parts of the image are in focus, that's really helpful. The color reproduction is really good. Fujifilm optics don't disappoint there. As far as sharpness goes, well, it's a similar story to any other zoom lens. When compared to a prime, it can't really compete at all focal lengths. So in a nutshell, this is really sharp at around 50 millimeters, which is kind of the middle of the range, and it's rather soft at 80 millimeters, which is to be expected. Also, the corners of the images will be a bit softer than the center, regardless of your focal length. So maybe it won't be your first option for, I don't know, architectural photography, for example, or anything like that. But what I found out is that the sharpest this lens gets is at around 5.6. That being said, don't be shy to use that 80mm focal length because of the fear that it's not the sharpest. If we're taking a look here at a photo taken at 50mm and then cropped in to match the one at 80mm, what we notice is that the 80 will undoubtedly offer more details and sharpness still. Optical zoom will always be better than digital, even when it's not the best optics. However, I don't particularly like making these sharpness tests because, quite honestly, any modern lens will be sharp enough. This is really nitpicking. And of course, if you want the ultimate sharpness and image quality, you go with Fuji's top of the line and sometimes specialized lenses. Not this. This is a great lens, but it's a great all-arounder, which means you can't have your cake and eat it too, or put differently, there are compromises to be made, always. And on that note, who is this lens for? Well, as I said in my X-T4 review video, I think for anyone who travels around a lot and can't carry around 10 different prime lenses, anyone who can't do that because of financial reasons, whatever the reason might be, there definitely can be one. And I do think there's a bit of everything for everyone in this lens, and in some ways it might even be better than their pro level lenses, simply because it's one of the newest, and the OIS, the AF work brilliantly. You have a big focal range, it's weather sealed, it's compact, it's light. I mean, I don't think it will disappoint you. And thanks for sticking around till the end. You're a real bro or sister. And till next time, go out and shoot. It can be on anything, your camera, phone, microwave, doesn't really matter. Just do it. And stay safe. See ya.